Life-changing vegan steak. You think I'm playing, but I'm not. This is what happens when you take a celery root and you roast it and you baste it and you give it all the love that you need. You create the best vegan steak you have ever had. Pair that with sauteed mushrooms, wilted spinach, and you essentially have a restaurant quality dish. So let's make it. Prepping the celery root is pretty straightforward. Our first step we want to do is scrub it thoroughly, making sure we remove all of the dirt from the tiny little cracks in the skin. We also want to remove any of the root hair type things that are growing on the bottom. Next, we're going to trim the bottom and the top off. Using a paring knife, we're going to prick the entire surface of the celery root, getting it ready for the roasting. Place the celery root in a cast iron pan. We're going to season with a little bit of kosher salt. Now let's get together the glazing liquid. We have 2 tablespoons of molasses, 2 tablespoons extra virgin olive oil, 2 tablespoons of my favorite vinegar, plum wine vinegar. We have a teaspoon of poultry seasoning, a teaspoon of kosher salt. Whisk those two together. We're going to baste the top of the celery root and the sides. This may look like a small step, but it's actually a super important step. We need to add about a 1/4 cup of water to the bottom of the pan. This is going to ensure that the glaze that falls off the sides of the celery root does not burn. Place the celery root in the oven preheated to 400 degrees. We're going to cook for roughly an hour and a half in total, and we're going to baste the celery root every 15 minutes. The transformation is already starting to happen. It's time for our first basting. It's been in for about 20 minutes. We're going to start with the liquid that's in the pan to baste the celery root first. This is why we continue to add the water to it. The flavor is really intensified as the liquids reduce in the pan. We're going to add additional glaze on top, and of course we're going to touch up with the water again to make sure that that glaze does not burn. Placing back in the oven, we're going to cook for another 15 to 20 minutes. I can hardly believe my eyes. The celery root has really transformed into this deep, dark, delicious. All of the natural sugars have caramelized. The molasses is caramelized. The seasoning, it's full of sweetness. It's full of richness. It's creamy. It has all of these wonderful qualities that were not happening when we started. When making a big, bold stock, we have to develop the different layers of flavor starting from the very first step, which is for us taking the bottom of the king oyster mushroom, trimming that off and cutting it into smaller pieces, removing our shiitake stems. We're going to give a rough chop to the mushroom stems. This is going to help increase our surface area, which will in turn help release more flavor into our stock. Cut the yellow onion into quarters. Next, we're going to chop 1 large carrot into small diced pieces. Medium to small is totally fine here. Now we have the base for our stock. Heat a medium-sized sauce pot over high heat. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of vegan butter. The butter is going to start to brown and smoke. It's perfectly fine. Add your onions to that. We're going to start to brown our onions, start to get that caramelization happening. You can see the onions are starting to caramelize and brown. They're starting to turn that deep, dark, delicious color. Next, we're going to add our mushroom stems and our carrots. We're going to continue to cook on high, making sure we caramelize all the vegetables at this point. I mentioned earlier, it's all about building the layers, and now we're continuing to build yet another layer. We're adding 1 cup of good quality red wine and 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. We're going to reduce this by half, adding that richness, adding the earthiness from the balsamic, and it's also going to help bring a little bit of color to our stock as well. The red wine is reduced by at least half. The vegetables are starting to look really good at this point. You could start to smell the aromas developing. Our last little layer of umami we're adding is Marmite. It's a healthy teaspoon. Next, we're going to add 4 cups of vegetable stock. Go ahead and mix that in. And finally, we're going to add our aromatics to the stock. We have parsley, Italian flat leaf, we have thyme, and a bay leaf. We're going to bring the stock up to a light boil, and then we're going to reduce the heat to low, and we're going to allow the stock to cook for about 45 minutes over low heat. The stock will reduce a little bit, maybe by about 1/4, and that's just perfect. Final step in our stock making is to actually strain it through a fine mesh strainer. And what we're left with is a really deep, dark, golden brown, delicious Very earthy, very aromatic, full-bodied stock that's ready to be paired with sauteed mushrooms. It's time to make the garlic confit. That's right. Really simple. We're going to add about a cup of olive oil and honestly, as much garlic as you want. The key here is we're going to cook the garlic very slow until it becomes very tender and soft and golden brown delicious. It cooked for about 45 minutes. As you can see, it's very tender. It's really a golden brown that's kind of on the lighter side, and it's perfectly aromatic and chewy and tasty. This is ready for our next step. To puree the garlic, place it into a bowl with a few tablespoons of the oil that the garlic was cooked in. We're also going to add a couple ladles of our mushroom stock. We're going to start pureeing until it becomes a very smooth paste. That's right, everybody. You just added a secret weapon to your culinary arsenal, the roasted garlic puree. This is an ingredient that you could add to sauces, you could add it to soups, you could add it to just about anything. You could toss it in tofu and bake it in the oven. It is going to add such a dynamic element to any culinary dish you're working on. Place the shiitake mushrooms in a medium-sized bowl. We're going to hit the shiitake mushrooms with a tablespoon or two of olive oil. We're going to season them with salt. We're going to season with black pepper, and then we're going to massage the mushrooms, making sure we're coating the tops and the bottoms and the sides, really rubbing the salt and pepper into the mushrooms. Place the shiitake mushrooms on a baking sheet lined with parchment paper. Place another piece of parchment paper on top of the shiitake mushrooms. We're then going to add another baking sheet on top. We're actually creating a weight for the shiitake mushrooms. We're going to cook them in the oven, set at 400 degrees for 35 minutes. Bam! Shiitake mushrooms are done. Look at those little beautiful discs of crisp, chewy, meaty umami bombs. To prep our king oyster mushrooms, we're going to slice them lengthwise about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thick. We want these on the thicker side for sure. Next, we're going to generously season with kosher salt and fresh cracked black pepper, which I am having a hard time doing here. It would be helpful if I could evenly distribute the black pepper on the king oyster mushrooms. Heat a large saute pan over high heat. Add a tablespoon of olive oil. Start placing the king oyster mushrooms flat on the saute pan. Keep that heat on high. We want the saute pan to continue to heat up. We're going to use another saute pan to press down on the king oyster mushrooms. This is really going to create a release of the king oyster mushrooms. It's going to make the king oyster mushroom become roasted and dark and delicious. Whew, and boy, you could really hear the pan sizzling right now. We are cooking on fire. We're about 3-4 minutes into the cooking process. We're going to flip the king oyster mushrooms. They should be really nice and golden brown, delicious on the bottom. We're going to flip them, and then we're going to put the pan back on top, cooking for about another 3 to 4 minutes. You know they're done when they're that golden brown delicious. That's right, they are perfect. Golden brown, delicious, seasoned. They have texture to them. They are just calling out for the roasted garlic puree to finish up this sauce. Sauteed spinach has never tasted so good. We're going to start off with a tablespoon of the olive oil from the roasted garlic. We're going to add 1 thinly sliced shallot to the pan. We're going to add the spinach on top of that. We're going to season with salt, and we're going to continue to cook on high just until the spinach starts to wilt. It's time to bring all of the elements together to create our roasted garlic and mushroom sauce. We're going to start with heating a saute pan over medium heat. We're going to add a couple tablespoons of our olive oil that we cooked the garlic in. We're going to add our king oyster mushrooms, our shiitakes. We're going to lightly saute them. We're basically bringing the pan up to heat, bringing the mushrooms up to heat. To that, we're going to add 2 to 3 tablespoons of the roasted garlic puree. We're going to continue to saute the puree and the mushrooms together. Continue cooking the sauce on medium-high heat. We're looking to emulsify the garlic puree into the mushroom stock, and we're looking to reduce the mushroom stock at the same time, reaching that ideal sauce-like consistency. Adding yet another layer of flavor, we're going to add a teaspoon to a tablespoon of our glazing liquid into the sauce. The sauce is reducing perfectly. The layers are coming together. Next, we're going to add our celery root right into the sauce. We're going to warm up the celery root, and we're also going to just kind of bring all the flavors together. Yo, the time is finally here, people. Let's go. Look at this beauty. Look at all the deep color. It's so rich and luxurious looking. We have our beautiful spinach, we have the mushrooms, and we have the sauce. I mean, Look at the little shallots in there. We're gonna cut out a nice little cute wedge. Oh, look at that. Should we just take a bite of just the steak first with the sauce? So the celery root has this really earthy sweetness to it. It's amazing. And then we have the molasses, the olive oil, all of that really umami bomb on the outside. So you get hit with both the sweetness and like that earthy umami-ness. And look how beautiful it is. I mean, that's stunning. Now let's get the combo bite. Look at that little wedge. Dude. The spinach with the shallots, the shiitake, the king oyster, the sauce. This is old school restaurant food right here, people. Love the style of our shiitake mushrooms when we roast them. When we roast them in the oven, they get kind of compressed and it really intensifies the flavor. And I love the texture. It's a little bit chewy. It has like a nice tooth to it. And then the king oysters are just full of earth, sauteed spinach, nice and bright and clean. We have the shallots, a little bit of sweetness, and the sauce with the roasted garlic puree really sets it off. It is amazing. Guys, I'm telling you, this dish right here is an absolute showstopper. It's really clean and balanced. It's absolutely phenomenal. I can't get the full bite. And I love that we left the skin on. It's so much texture. It's perfect. One last bite. Hit that like button. Leave some comments. And you know what? We'll see you next Saturday. Thank you. Everybody's gonna be like, ooh, ah.